now we're going to take a quick look at the overall architecture to put some context into A, what Matt just showed, B, how we're going to handle the back-end processing of that customer sales order and project in NetSuite. And then we're going to bring it back full cycle into talking about things like how we handle both service and support, and then ultimately a concept of Experience Cloud where we're communicating with our end clients on a number of different areas. So if you see the graphic here, what Matt just went through was the Salesforce selling process. So we skipped through a little bit quickly, but at one point, Ohana was a lead in our Salesforce environment, gathered by a number of different areas, whether it was internet searches, etc. They ultimately became an account. And what you saw in the last section is Matt created an opportunity for Ohana. He focused largely in the estimating, proposal, and quoting stage, really orchestrating and showing, identifying what CPQ does for professional services or organizations. Now, for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to call it an IT services environment that will kind of paint a picture of how we can then take what Matt produced out of the CPQ or configure price quote tool and ultimately execute that in our backend NetSuite system. What I'm going to start to show is how our customer ends up in NetSuite, our sales order or booking, the project management tool within our NetSuite application, and a number of different features that go along with our project management, being project tasks or a WBS structure, some of the resourcing that we can align how we're executing the projects with the people who are going to be assigned to it, how we can handle some of the billing scenarios, both from time and material based, recurring, and a number of different billing operations. We'll start to track things like project status. How are we actually executing on this project? Time entry, invoicing from our billing system, revenue recognition from a percent complete perspective, and then taking some of those various data points and bringing those back up into what we call Experience Cloud to really give a customer-facing experience. We'll also talk again about some of the service and support and how that ties in with our NetSuite environment. The first integration point that we're going to talk about is our customer. Typically, clients choose to have customers integrate from their Salesforce environment to NetSuite when an opportunity goes into a closed won status. We'll take that same approach here, and we'll say that once Matt brought that opportunity into closed won, the client e-signed off on the quote or proposal that he demonstrated, this customer will automatically come into NetSuite. There we can track some primary information like the customer name, the company name, address, terms, etc. But what we want to focus on today is really the transactional flow of what happens next. The second thing we're going to look at is a sales order. Again, the concept here and the theme of the webinar is better together, right? Peanut butter and jelly. We want this information to flow downstream from your Salesforce environment into NetSuite so that we're omitting things like manual entry, double keying, and really error-prone manual processes. When we take a look at this sales order, we can see we have the sales order is tied to our Ohana customer. We have the date of it. We could have a start and end date if this is more of a contractual type agreement that covers a period of performance. The customer may optionally give us a purchase order number that we can put on our invoices and external communication to make sure they're aligning it to their internal systems as well. We can define a memo to really understand what the booking is for. As we scroll down, we can identify things like what subsidiary or legal entity we're transacting in, what department, class, and location from a segment perspective. But really, the magic here is that we're going to go ahead and take all of the different products that were selected in the magic of the CPQ tool and make sure we're aligning that to how we're executing on this particular booking. Here, I have an example of an IT services organization that those products that you saw in CPQ translate to the following areas on the sales order. So we have a planning item, design, development, testing, training, deployment, and support. Some of the areas that CPQ covered was maybe we can never sell development without training. We can never sell the whole bundle of an implementation without deployment or support. So really making sure that your business logic translate to how you sell and to how you execute on these projects. So here you can see I have my various products that integrated from Salesforce, the quantities of those that were sold, and then the pricing that Matt was showing upstream with the fully discounted rates, etc. Now from here, what we also like to do is really automate the creation of the project. So you can see that this particular sales order is related to an IT services project. And if we take a look at that project, there's a number of things we're going to track there. Again, we have our primary information where we can have a specific job ID, a more readable job name. It's tied to our Ohana customer. And we can track various things like job manager or project manager, who is ultimately responsible for the completion of this project. The status, we can say in process, not started, complete. Our project overview, which is going to capture things like how much work did we have actually planned, how much have we allocated to our various resources, how many hours have we worked on it, and what do we have remaining. The really magic here is what does it give us from a percent complete calculation, percent complete by allocated work. And some of these areas that I do want you to remember, because these are going to be things that we're going to be talking about as it relates to communication with the external client from an Experience Cloud perspective. As we move down, we can see our project dates, what our scheduling method is, what the start date of the project is. NetSuite will then start to calculate an end date based on how many hours are inputted. And we can also do baselining, meaning we take a snapshot at a various point in time and do some variance reporting as the project plan starts to change. The last section is just, again, the segments of more of a GL type perspective to make sure that we have the ability to slice and dice project profitability by a number of different areas that our company is ultimately very interested in. When we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of the project, you can see that on my schedule tab, I have project tasks and milestones. In this particular example, and in many different implementations, we've aligned the way that we sell with the way that we're executing projects. So what's important to note here is that we have a one-to-one relationship of the items and products that were sold on our sales order and ultimately our upstream quote to our project task. So you can see the same planning, design, develop, training, deployment, support, etc. And again, this would be very specific to the way that you execute these types of projects. For each of our project tasks, we can identify them as either a milestone or a task, a milestone meaning more of a stage gate that needs to be either completed or not started. This may trigger things like billing, revenue recognition, whereas a project task is more along the lines of a task that we're charging time to. All of our tasks have start and end dates. They can all be baselined individually. And there's a bunch of different views that we can take to see things like how much work was planned, calculated, estimated costing, and there's a lot of different information that we can track at the project task level. Ultimately, we want to make sure that we're automating the creation of your WBS as much as we can to avoid, again, the manual entry. As we're moving right across the tabs, you'll see we have our resourcing tab where we can go and we can resource individuals on our project. Again, we have a various different ways to accomplish this, but at the very simple level, we may say, I want to go ahead and resource an employee named IT resource because we're not terribly creative against this project, against our development task, between this start date and end date, and I want to allocate 100 hours. We can allocate based on hours or a percentage of time. And our allocation type is hard or soft. And this just gives us more of a, did I pencil this individual in, or is this a hard allocation that I need this individual to work on this project for? And we can see that we can have any number of resources identified on the project. We can have some information, so giving us who the name of the resource is, email, what their role is on the project. And then also things like, I want to be able to track their time against the project. And we'll take a look at this from more of a weekly time card perspective, but how much time was entered and what is the status of that time? Was it billed, not billed? Maybe it's marked as non-billable, all dependent on what type of project we have. On the financial tab, we're defining a number of different things, but mainly what I want to bring to your attention is billing types. You can see that this particular project is charge-based billing, meaning I'm really doing more of a time and material-based billing. We can define our billing rate cards, and again, this can be brought from the upstream services, upstream applications like Salesforce to have our pricing flow all the way into our project billing to make sure we're aligning to the proposal that was actually signed. We have our primary currency, and this can be in any currency that we have set up in NetSuite with an exchange rate. At the very bottom, we have what's called a percent complete override, and this really talks to the revenue recognition elements of it. Some of our clients like to have NetSuite calculate our percent complete based on the number of hours worked over the number of hours that were planned for the project. Some actually like to dictate, like this example, a percent complete override to say that, hey, this project is 25% complete as of March 2020, and that's how much revenue I want to recognize for it. As we're moving down, we have things called charges. And charges can be used for a number of different areas. They can be used for recurring type billing. They can be used for time-based rules, fixed fee rules, expense rules, a number of different really flexible billing options we have. But for this example, we have 5 time charges created for actual time that was entered. All of our time was priced according to the proposal that was signed. We have our amount, and ultimately these charges generated an invoice for a quantity of 40 at our applicable rate. Okay. Now, if we talk a little bit about project status. So again, project status for us can handle a number of different things. One, communication to project managers, how they're actually executing on projects. This can be leveraged for internal stakeholders like executives or finance to really get an understanding of, are we profitable for this particular project or are we lagging behind? It can be used for external clients, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in Experience Cloud. And then really from more of a financial aspect, it can be a driver of revenue recognition. So for this example, we have what's called a revenue arrangement that helps us dictate really robust revenue recognition rules that that do follow things like GAAP and make sure that we're accounting for revenue applicably, and then make sure we have an audit trail. So a revenue recognition in this case is really a transaction in which we can recognize revenue based on a percentage of time on that project. And then the last thing we'll take a look at is, from an end user perspective, what do I actually have to enter? Now, what we're seeing here is that we have a weekly time card. And again, our resource just has to identify what projects that they're working on, what task within that project, and we can filter this task list based on just the projects and tasks that they've been assigned to, so they're not seeing a laundry list of projects, whether or not that time is billable, and we can have different rules for that as well to make sure that maybe we don't want the individual to choose if this is a billable or non-billable item, what service item we're billing against, and then some of the department class and locations that we can default from the employee record. So a number of different ways that we can handle this from the back end, but again, the theme is that all of this information is flowing downhill into Salesforce, and we're actually executing this project according to how we sold it.